Before we begin with our meditation, I'd like to have some time for acknowledgements, acknowledging the land that we rest on. You might notice our connection with the ground, and our connection with the earth that's deeply beneath us. And spending just a moment acknowledging the history of this land, and the ancestors of this land, the Monacan people. In the same way, we can acknowledge the ancestors of this lineage, generations upon generations of Asian contemplatives who have passed our tradition down from warm hand to warm hand. And this theme of interconnection, of lineage, of land, is a really apt introduction to our evening together, focused on ethics, hearing, ethics, and reconciliation. So we have co-created this evening, and I'd like to mention as I start out tonight that I'm wearing two hats tonight as I come in front of you all. One is as a Dharma leader here at IMCC, and the other is as the co-chair of the Hearing, Ethics, and Reconciliation Committee. Julie Convisor, who's also here tonight, is the other co-chair. On our committee, we have Anna Van Hoy, Dan Metter, Christina Weaver, and Phil DuPont. We'll introduce all of them later on as well. I'm going to start off our time with some brief comments around the concept that's really at the core of this committee and our work, which is ethics, and specifically ethics from a Buddhist perspective. So as we start off tonight, I realize how quickly we can get away from connection to this body. I speak for myself first and foremost. So I was going to start off with just a moment of coming into relationship with this body around what comes up for us and the felt sense in this body around this concept of ethics. Just taking a moment to attune to anything that's noticeable in the body. Around this concept of ethics. For some of us, tuning into ethics in the body might feel a bit novel, a bit new. Sometimes our perception of ethics is from an external imposition of them. And so my hope, one of our hopes for this time together, is to come into relationship with how ethical foundations for our practice can be a wellspring of aliveness. The word juiciness comes to my mind. How can ethics be really part of the flow of our practice and a cornerstone? So first, starting with some definition. There's a word in the Pali Canon that comes up a lot. I'm going to type it in the chat here. Sila. S-I-L-A. And those are some resources around the precepts as well. This concept of sila is defined as virtuous conduct, moral restraint. Two teachers I really admire, Thanissaro and Kittisaro, use this phrase, a wholesome groove. I really like that in my body, that idea of a wholesome groove of conduct, of thought, speech, and action. In our practices, if we are aspiring to uncover our patterns of behavior, our conditioned beliefs, we're also aspiring to come more into this place of a wholesome groove. What feels good in our bodies around thought, speech, and action. And so there's this invitation in the Buddhist conception of ethics to have our ethical conduct and code be more of an internal, self-regulating process, becoming a cornerstone of our practice as we're engaging in deeper and deeper levels with what feels right for this body. How am I attuning to this heart, this mind, this belly in terms of my actions in the world? A mentor of mine, Brian Lesage, who's a teacher out in Albuquerque, a Dharma teacher, he gave me this really helpful perspective on ethics. This idea of following an inner ethical code, providing the spaciousness that's necessary for practice. It's pointed out many times in the Buddha's teachings that a mind and a body and a heart that are preoccupied with keeping track of what we've told whom, if there's some white lies going on, or perhaps a mind that's distracted by harm that's been caused by this being. Those kinds of circumstances are not conducive to greater concentration, greater insight and wisdom coming forth. And so attuning to our own inner ethical code, investigating what that might be for each of us, feeling the juice of that inquiry, the flow, can really provide nurturance for our practice, support, and a great deepening as we're engaging with these questions for ourselves. What is my own internal ethical code? How do I decide that if there's no one else telling me what it is or what it's not? A note that's been really helpful for me in my learning process around Buddhist ethics is this perspective on the phenomena of guilt and self-judgment. Sometimes some of us may have some associations with guilt and self-judgment around ethics, ethical codes. And it's helpful to know that in the Buddhist perspective, Buddhist spiritual practice, guilt and self-judgment are not seen as skillful behavior, not encouraged. We're encouraged to practice with these when they arise, noticing, allowing, some investigating perhaps, and then letting go. So the question arose for me in putting this talk together, if we're not coming to our own ethical code from a basis of guilt or self-judgment, where exactly are we coming from? And then two terms from the Pali Canon have really helped me out in this exploration as well. I'm going to type those into the chat. One is hiri, one is otapa. As I've read more about these in the last year or so, they're known as the guardians of the world in some some commentaries on the Pali Canon. Hiri is defined as a healthy sense of remorse for harm done. A healthy sense of remorse for harm done. And Ottappa is defined as a healthy sense of fear of wrongdoing. And if neither of these are coming out of guilt, the idea of remorse, and again, kind of focusing on the body, how might we feel a healthy sense of remorse for harm done, a healthy sense of fear of wrongdoing in the body, noticing our own body's alignment and integrity with our innate goodness. Remorse can lead to action, to the repairing of harm done, making of amends, apologies. And that healthy sense of a fear of wrongdoing, I imagine my finger hovering over the send button of an email and having the thought, oh, maybe I should sit on this for a night. Maybe tomorrow would be a better time to read over this email and see if I'm still in the same frame of mind. Ottappa, that healthy sense of fear of wrongdoing. What I find really reassuring about the Buddhist perspective and tradition, tenets, is this idea that each of us is endowed with a really healthy capacity for self-reflection, for discernment. We are learning to trust this being, trust this heart, and this mind, and this body. And this idea of our own innate goodness as being really core in the Buddha's teachings. For some of us who have been conditioned otherwise, that could be a very novel and deeply seated navigation. What does it mean to have innate goodness? No questions asked. Welcome as we are. And working with the refuges, the triple jewel. So taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. There's this opportunity to envision the first jewel, the first of the three, taking refuge in the Buddha, as believing or sensing the possibility that there was enlightenment for this historic figure, the Buddha. There's also this invitation to envision that this being, that each of these beings here tonight, that enlightenment is also possible for all of us. We all have our own inner Buddha, inner innate goodness. And our practice is helping to uncover that innate goodness and remind us of who we truly are. So this ethical code, inner ethical code, is something that we is already there, already here. Something that we can attune to in more depth as we become deeper immersed in our practices, deeper and more deep awareness of our integrity, how to stay aligned with this being. And then, of course, there are the precepts, which I would like to mention. But with this frame of them being external to us, it's kind of an exploration. I'm going to list the precepts. There are 5 in our tradition. I think it's notable that in other Buddhist traditions, there are, in Zen, for example, there's 16 in some lineages. Monastics keep a longer list of precepts, of rules. And the inquiry here is, what is this being, each of ours? What is our internal conception of ethical code? How can we embody these precepts in a way that are in alignment with each of us? We're going to have the opportunity to work some with these precepts in small groups as we move through our evening. There's actually 2 different links I'm going to put in the chat now. The first is just kind of a simple, short explanation of each precept. And the second one is the mindfulness trainings that I put in again. These are Thich Nhat Hanh's mindfulness trainings, and they're much more expansive and juicy, you might say. So I'm going to just briefly go over the 5 precepts, knowing that we'll come back to those in groups. So the 5 precepts, the first is not taking any life, not killing. The second is not taking anything that is not freely offered, not stealing. The third is not misusing our sexuality, sexual misconduct, abstaining from that. The fourth is abstaining from false speech. And the fifth is refraining from intoxicants. Again, the inquiry, how does that work for me? How could I internalize these precepts in a way that fits with this being wherever I am in my life? So it is my great honor to pass the baton to my other dear here colleagues. I'm just going to briefly introduce who we all are. So we've got Phil DuPont. He'll be speaking a bit about the origins of here. We've got Julie Convisor, who will continue with some of the history of here. Anna Van Hoy is going to do some explaining of deep listening. Christina Weaver is going to speak a bit about reconciliation and also the values of our community. And then Dan Metter is going to be leading us into those breakout groups, inviting the inquiry that we'll be moving forward with around precepts. So this is the Here committee. We're really honored to be here. Thank you, everyone, and I'll pass the baton to Phil.
Thank you, Liz. So I'm going to just talk about the deep history of the Here Committee, which originally was called the Ear Committee. And the committee came about 10 years ago, 10 to 11 years ago, when it was reported that there was unwanted attention being demonstrated towards someone in the audience in the Tuesday night sit. And there was a realization on the board that, oh, we don't know how to deal with that. We don't have a mechanism if someone's misbehaving at our sangha meetings. How do we manage that? And I don't actually recall how that particular situation was handled, but it certainly pointed to the need for a committee to address tensions, conflicts, disagreements, and other difficulties that came up. And so the Ear Committee started, and the early Ear Committee meetings involved studying the book, Everything is Workable, a Zen approach to conflict resolution. And that was a real helpful basis for how to think about addressing tensions and conflicts. And, and over the years, there have been probably no more than one referral on average to the Ear and Now Here Committee each year. And most of those referrals have been resolved through deep listening from people really feeling deeply heard about what they're concerned about. So the EAR committee initially was set up to be responsive, and of course now we're moving into some really different territory, and I'll hand that off to Julie to talk about kind of the more recent functions of HEAR.
Thanks, Phil. Good evening, everybody. Phil and I got to be sort of in the first generation of EAR when it started. We were invited to be community members. And so I'll pick up the story where Phil left it off. About 5 years ago, as some of you may know, we started exploring more deeply some of our Sangha's cultural habits and heritage with Ruth King around sort of our predominantly white culture. And it got us opening up and thinking more broadly about what it really means to be an inclusive community, and that it's not just a question of race or age or other things that were limited in our community, but that we're hoping to continue to address, but also just of having more creative input largely within the community, and how to invite many voices to be heard. That all of you here tonight, and all of you who participated in IMCC over the years, or who are new, have important responses, reflections, feedback, and ideas for us as a Sangha, as a community. So about 2 years ago, those of us in EAR really began to talk about, could EAR as a council play a greater role as a third space where community members could bring ideas, bring feedback, responses, and concerns, and there could be more fluid back and forth within our community. And so we sort of came up with a proposal to expand the mission of EAR to include H, the hearing, as an active, proactive action of this committee. And it was approved in December of 2021. So just this past December, that mission was finalized and approved, that expanded mission. And we have been very busy of late, and not just because of sort of, big moments in our Sangha's experience, but our mission kicked in, and we had already planned and have started our community listening sessions. We have invited one-on-one people to come in and be heard in a deep listening individual, and we welcome you to request that. We are also engaged with supporting the board as leadership and providing some support and consulting there, and bringing in feedback for the board. So we've been pretty busy in our new mission, and I'm happy to be here tonight. And I'll pass it to Anna Van Hoy, who will speak a little bit more about this latest function, the hearing and deep listening function.
Sorry, I was just pausing for a moment. Thank you so much. So I get the lovely gift of speaking to you about the listening aspect of HEAR. But before we talk about listening, I want to actually talk about feeling heard. I'm going to ask you if you have ever had that amazing experience of really being heard. That feeling that someone is truly interested in what you are saying, wants to understand your perspective. And then it feels like they get it. Can you remember a time when that happened? Okay. To me, it feels like such a gift. Like, at least for that moment, I'm seen by someone. There's a sense of warmth and ease. So it turns out that feeling is so important to our well-being that the Buddha chose loving speech and deep listening as one of the 5 precepts or ethics that are most important to follow. This precept is one of the foundations of the mission of here. So from our mission is to collectively hear and respond with care to diverse community voices expressing creative ideas and joyful appreciation, as well as conflict and challenge. Also from our mission, because the process of exploring diverse views often requires conscious, facilitated support, here offers structured opportunities for dialogue and sharing of ideas, as well as informal, ongoing hearing of feedback and concerns. I'd like to offer Thich Nhat Hanh's guidance on loving speech and deep listening. So this is from Thich Nhat Hanh. Aware of the suffering caused by unmindful speech and the inability to listen to others, I am committed to cultivating loving speech and compassionate listening in order to relieve suffering and to promote reconciliation and peace in myself and among other people, ethnic and religious groups, and nations. Knowing that words can create happiness or suffering, I'm committed to speaking truthfully, using words that inspire confidence, joy, and hope. When anger is manifesting in me, I am determined not to speak. I will practice mindful breathing and walking in order to recognize and to look deeply into my anger. I know that the roots of anger can be found in my wrong perceptions and lack of understanding of the suffering in myself and in the other person. I will speak and listen in a way that can help myself and the other person to transform suffering and see the way out of difficult situations. I am determined not to spread news that I do not know to be certain, and not to utter words that can cause division or discord. I will practice right diligence to nourish my capacity for understanding, love, joy, and inclusiveness, and gradually transform anger, violence, and fear that lie deep in my consciousness. And lastly, I'll just share, friends shared a quote with me today that said, listening deeply, you can change the world. So I think now Christina maybe has something to add. Is that right, Liz? Okay, thanks.
Good evening, everyone. It's great to be here. I'm Christina. I think I'll just add, so as you're hearing, here is committed to deep listening, and we have been busier than ever, both offering that in one-on-one conversations with people who come to us, and also through our listening sessions, and also, as Julie mentioned, in support of the board, and sort of really feeling our way through how can we be of service. Phil mentioned that here got started consulting. What is the overlap between conflict resolution theory and meditation, Buddhist meditation practice? And I just want to share that I think we're in a similar moment right now on here, where we're looking at what can we learn from other traditions of conflict transformation and conflict resolution and reconciliation. And how does that align with Buddhist ethics, and what more might we be able to offer in service to the sangha? We have on our committee a wide range of expertise, people who have experience as therapists, people who have experience as advocates, and I bring experience in mediation, in sort of complex public policy mediation. And so I've been speaking on the HERE committee about principles that come from that field of conflict resolution and mediation that have to do with creating trauma-informed, inclusive, deliberative communities where people can build a sense of common ground, build a sense of higher ground through very particular tools that can be helpful for deliberation. And just to share that we are working towards offering an in-service to the board around particular techniques of how to build consensus towards that goal of how can we be listening deeply for understanding at both the individual one-on-one and small group KM, but also at the collective level as a sangha. So just kind of updating the community that we are looking at a variety of resources to ourselves learn how to serve at this time. And with that, I think I'm going to hand it to Dan.
Thanks, Christina. So you've heard a bit about the 5 precepts, and you've heard Anna give that narrative description about right speech, and there's a lot in that. And there's a lot in each of the 5 precepts, and so there's really too much to try to contemplate all 5 at one time. So in our breakout groups this evening, each breakout group is going to consider one of the 5 precepts. And again, in the framing of the Thich Nhat Hanh mindfulness training, those 5 precepts are the reverence for life, true happiness, true love, loving speech and deep listening, as Anna spoke about, and nourishment and healing. Of course, there are different words and different formulations of those 5 precepts, but those are the broad descriptions of how they're set forth in the Thich Nhat Hanh training. So each group will contemplate one of those, and what we're suggesting as a prompt for inquiry and discussion is, how does that precept play a role in the ethical foundation of your own personal life and in the life of our sangha?
The breakup groups discussions were not recorded. Please visit the event webpage to access resources on the 5 precepts and Thich Nhat Hanh's mindfulness trainings.